Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our Terrell County Virtual Lunch and Learn series. I'm Jessica McCrory, the County Extension Agent in Terrell County. We hope you enjoy this series over the next 2 weeks. We will be recording this session, upcoming sessions, and past sessions for future viewing and for you to pass along to other folks. At the conclusion of this program, there will be an evaluation available. It's not too long, so please consider filling it out for us. The link to the evaluation is on the same page as the Zoom session. Now to our program. Today, we will have Dr. Morgan Treadwell talking brush busters with focusing on mesquite, prickly pear, and cedar, or also known as red berry juniper. So, Dr. Treadwell, it's all yours.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jessica. And thank you to everyone tuning in and hopefully who will watch this later on via social media or Jessica's link from her AgriLife blog. I'm really excited to be delivering this program today. Brush Busters is a fantastic concept that was developed probably in the early 90s, maybe even a little bit before that. But we'll cover some introduction slides to what Brush Busters is and how to effectively use that on your property. And then we'll get into the specifics of what Brush Busters means from a mesquite perspective. And then tomorrow we're going to look at prickly pear and red berry juniper. So I don't know about you, but I've got COVID fatigue, which also means Zoom fatigue. And I have found that the smaller the bites you can take on these webinars, the more effective they are and easier to listen to. So we're going to do a small bite today and then finish it up tomorrow as well. And as I mentioned earlier, everything is going to be recorded because Jessica is absolutely phenomenal at her job, which makes my job a lot easier and hopefully information more readily available for y'all to look at. Okay, so we'll keep cruising through here. Brush Busters was originally developed by Dr. Alan McGinty and Dr. Terrell from the San Angelo Research Center, looking at everything from both a research perspective and also an extension perspective. So they tested all of these techniques out before they started pushing it from an extension perspective and getting it into the hands of our landowners. So Brush Busters is a do-it-yourself type brush management. It is only IPT work, so individual plant treatment work. We won't find any broadcast applications in here or any large acreage type applications. Everything that we're going to be covering here is something you can do with your hand sprayer that you pick up from your local feed store. But it is a start to finish herbicide application management system. The overall goal is to target those brush seedlings before they become mature brush over 5 feet tall. And so we want to get them when they're young, when they're vulnerable, and when they're sensitive to that herbicide application. And we have found that this IPT approach or Brush Busters approach has increased in importance due to the need to basically brush sculpt and to selectively choose which brush species you are going to be treating. We do recognize that there are desirable browse species out there for our wildlife and the need to create the ideal amount of cover and also open spaces. And so when we can be very selective in that herbicide application, we increase our overall stewardship footprint and impact in terms of that selective control. So what Brush Busters avoids is obviously waiting until that brush is mature and dense. When it is that mature, dense stand, closed canopy, for example, red berry juniper, it's going to take something more than just a handheld herbicide sprayer to get in there and effectively do the job. So hopefully Brush Buster serves as that intermittent treatment between the initial reclamation management strategy, and it also serves as that routine management that you're in the maintenance mode, so to speak. So it breaks that cycle of investing in expensive reclamation treatment and then doing nothing and then waiting until that brush stand is again mature and dense. And so it extends that initial treatment life. And we see this as very important because it lends to the productivity and overall integrity of our rangelands and also helps out the pocketbook of our ranchers as well because we are extending that initial treatment. So we focus on the most successful and consistent species specific approach. All of this is science based on replicated research that has been performed throughout the state. We have simple treatment instructions, so everything is really basic, very easy to understand, and also simple equipment needs. So you can go out and find all of this equipment at your local feed store or online, and it is very easy to follow, in my opinion, because it makes a lot of common sense, especially when your boots are just on the ground dealing with this invasive brush. So brush busters is really, like I said, it's a treatment option for when you're in that maintenance mode. And so we're targeting these invasive brush species before the debilitation of your desirable forage plants start to decline, before your livestock production starts to decline. And so this is the management strategy for you before you start adjusting your stocking rate and things like that due to grazable acres or loss of grazable acres, because we're targeting that brush at the most vulnerable growth stage and before it is mature and dense. We have found that this is very successful and effective because it offers a highly selective, less expensive, and easy to implement approach. Again, brush busters is not going to be very effective if you're dealing with mature, dense stands of brush. We need to be in that seedling stage where everything is vulnerable and easy to manage with a handheld IPT approach. So again, there are several advantages for using this brush buster program, but probably the biggest advantage is due to the overall cost. So when we talked about that reclamation management treatment approach, when we were dealing with very dense stands of brush, for example, the picture that you see on the right hand of your screen, when brushes like that, when we've got closed canopy, juniper, and just very thick stands of juniper, you're looking at maybe around $200 an acre to get in there and mechanically manage that pasture. Whereas if you started earlier, before that juniper was dense and closed canopy, like the picture on the left, you're looking at definitely less expensive approach, but probably something that's more effective in the long term because you're sustaining your livestock productivity and you're sustaining the overall integrity of those rangelands. You're keeping your forage production at an optimized level. So again, this works really well if you're dealing with redberry juniper who's encroaching in on your open spaces, on your plateaus, or maybe in the draws of your pastures. If you can target it when they're seedlings, when they're small, when they're less than 5 feet, you're going to have a little bit better overall management strategy in the long-term scheme of things. And when I say long-term, we're talking 30 years or so down the road. Okay, so let's start things off with mesquite control from a brush buster's perspective. There are a couple of different techniques or management applications that you can apply. The first two that I want to cover are stem spray or cut stump approach. Now, these two are beneficial in my opinion because you can implement these anytime during the year. So, for example, I do a little bit better management of my mesquite when it's cooler temperatures outside. For example, these fall days are really nice to work in right now. Cool mornings, and so you can use these two types of strategies during any time of the year. So it works year round. This works on any type of hardwood species. Okay, so it's not just mesquite. You can use these type of management applications on your redberry juniper as well, and we'll cover that a little bit more in detail tomorrow. With the stem spray or the cut stump method, you have a really minimal amount of that temporary short-term grass damage or brownout that we typically see around those trees that you treat. Typically, you'll see a ring of dead herbaceous material. And since we're only spraying the stems and the stumps on with this management application, we see definitely less herbaceous damage than what we would see with the foliar application. So with the stem spray or the cut stump method, you want to use a small nozzle. So for example, an X1 or an X3 nozzle. On your nozzles, especially if you're using those brass nozzles, it will have a stamp on there for an X1 or X3 nozzle. And the smaller the number size, the smaller the orifice on those nozzles. So that's kind of a general rule of thumb. For these cut stump or stem spray herbicide applications on mesquite, let me be very clear, on mesquite, we're going to be using a remedy diesel mix. And that has been the tried and true method probably since the beginning of brush busters. That has not changed. So remedy and diesel mixed together. You can replace the diesel with the basil oil, but sometimes that basil oil will clog up your sprayers and your nozzles. And so you just want to be pretty careful of that. Again, other landowners sometimes prefer the basil oil over the diesel just because of any potential drift or volatilization, anything like that. But you can use either or. Now the rates that we're going to be looking at differs a little bit. So this will be for a stem spray application. If you're dealing with something that has smooth bark, so for example, that mesquite seedling at the bottom of the page, a brand new seedling, something that, is probably 3 years of age or younger, you can get away with a reduced amount of remedy. So you're looking at a 15% remedy with 85% diesel. And again, these are percentages based off of your total gallons. So it's the ratio broken down into that. With these herbicide rates, there's no need to use a surfactant when you're doing these stem sprays or these cut stumps. Because that diesel or basil oil will keep it on there. Now, if you're looking at a rough bark, so say, for example, a mesquite that's 10 or 20 years old, a kind of a bull mesquite, something that's well established, you need to increase that remedy ratio up to 25% and then bump your diesel or basil oil down to 75%. Okay, so for that stem spray or basil spray herbicide management application, again, just to review, you can use anywhere from 15 to 25% Remedy Ultra, depending on the type of tree that you're treating, and then you're going to adjust your diesel or basil oil according to that remedy mix, okay? You wanna lightly wet all stems from the ground to 12 inches. Again, that might vary depending on your grass height, but again, pull that grass away, clear that grass away, get down to the soil surface, and from the soil surface to approximately 12 inches, you want to lightly wet, okay? You don't want anything really running off. The more runoff you have, the more herbaceous loss you're going to have around that stem spray or around that stem. And you want it, the most important part is to get 360 degrees around that stem. Now, if you have a multi-stem mesquite, something that's been repeatedly top killed and has basally resprouted, and now instead of one stem, you've got 5 or 6, you need to treat every single stem, okay? If you do not treat every single stem, that's still going to be a live tree. And now it's just going to resprout all over again. So again, if you've got multi-stems, you need to make sure you're treating every single one of them. Again, this type of application works any time of the year. So now that we're in the fall and progressing through the winter, this would be a good time to utilize these stem spray application techniques. Okay, the second method I want to cover is a cut stump method. And this is in the mesquite category, but you can also use this on any hardwood species that you're managing. Okay, it's very effective. The cut stump method is probably the closest thing to 100% guarantee of plant mortality that we have. It's very, very effective if you follow the right procedures. So with the cut stump method, you want to cut every stem close to the soil surface. For example, the picture on the right, in my opinion, those stems are too long. Okay, they should have been reduced down to that ground level. You don't want to drag any soil on top of the stump. You want to keep it clean, and you want to also keep it flat. So whether or not you're using loppers to cut that stem or a chainsaw, make sure it's a flat cut. Right after you get done removing that above ground biomass and you're cutting it, you need to spray it immediately. Waiting the next day or the next week, we have found reduces the overall effectiveness of the cut stump method, and you start to compromise your plant mortality if you wait after cutting it. So a good rule of thumb is spraying immediately, preferably nothing more than 20 minutes. So if you've got a partner helping you, one's cutting, one's spraying, that's probably the most effective way to go about the cut stump method. You want to adjust your nozzle to deliver a coarse mist. You want to spray the entire surface, including those outer edges, and you want to spray the bark from the cut to the ground level. So if you've got, a couple inches from where the soil surface starts to where you cut, make sure you spray all of that, the tops, the sides, and make sure you've got enough herbicide on there to penetrate that cambium layer. Okay. And also to make sure that you know where you're spraying, you can throw a little bit of dye in this at a 0.25% rate to make sure that you know where you're spraying and what you're spraying. And using dye is also a really effective way to make sure that you're not overspraying or applying too much product on this cut stump method. So this is an example of a cut stump method gone wrong. So for example, on the left, not every stem was sprayed. So one stem was sprayed, that one stem then resprouted, and now we've got another tree to treat all over again. So, and on the right, we probably didn't get enough product on this cut stump, for example, on the side, and so we can see that basal resprouting coming out of the side of that main stem. And again, this has turned into a multi-stemmed plant individual, which is even more troublesome and challenging to effectively spray with herbicide. So once you do it, you want to do it the right way and make sure you've got good coverage and make sure every stem or every part of that cut stump is getting treated. This is some of the data that was done at Fort Stockton when Dr. Charlie Hart was out there. They looked at the percent mortality and the relationship between treating that cut stump with the herbicide after you remove that above ground biomass. And you can see that there's a definite window of mortality that exists if you can treat within 15 or even 20 minutes. Anything past 30 minutes will start to decrease in overall plant mortality. So waiting the next day or even the next week, if that's too long of time to wait after cutting. Okay, now we're going to transition into those foliar applications for managing mesquite. A foliar application is very different from stem spray or a cut stump spray because there is a very specific window of opportunity that you target when you're putting it on a foliar application. So you don't want to make foliar applications when plants are not growing. So when they're not in their active period of growth during the growing season. You also want to avoid those extreme types of years. So for example, in very extremely wet years, typically with an above average precipitation year, our soil temperatures remain low. And that is not conducive for a successful foliar application because you're wanting that herbicide to be translocated throughout the plant and you need warm temperatures to make that happen. You also want to avoid those dry years. So for example, if you're contemplating a foliar application in 2021, but we run into a dry spell, it's not necessarily a drought, but it is a dry spell like we can get in West Texas. You want to maybe push that herbicide application back, or you want to wait until you get a little bit better growing conditions. Because what we want and what is absolutely crucial for a foliar application is healthy leaf tissue. You want big, full leaves to absorb all of that herbicide that you just put on there. So you want to avoid any times that plant is stressed. So for example, if we have a late frost, sometimes we can get a late April frost, and that will definitely alter how these trees respond to that herbicide. You also want to inspect those trees for any hail damage or insect damage or any wind damage that might happen. You want to avoid any time after a recent rainfall, because what that will typically do will result in new phenology of that tree. So you'll start to see maybe newer leaves, and you'll see varying degrees of plant phenology within that tree, within one individual tree. Some leaves may be that mature, darker, deeper green, whereas some parts of the tree may have lighter green leaves that symbolize new growth on that mesquite tree. And that typically occurs at the very tops of those plants. So you just want to keep an eyeball on all of that. You want to avoid during the high wind. Even if it is an IPT application, drift can easily occur. You also want to avoid the high temperatures that exist during the growing season. Generally anything above 90 degrees Fahrenheit, you want to steer clear. So make sure that you are spraying maybe during the cooler part of the morning or the cooler part of the evening, just to prevent any volatilization. And also you want to avoid that low humidity or extremely low humidity. So when it's in the single digits or anything less than 20%. Okay, so let's talk about when to spray then if we are thinking about a foliar application of mesquite. You want to spray when those leaves are uniformly dark green in color. That shows a mature tree in its phenology stages. Okay, so there's no new growth that has occurred. You don't want to spray when beans are present or fully elongated. You want to target when that canopy is in good condition. There's stable moisture conditions, so not too wet, not too dry, but a very consistent and ample amount of soil moisture. And this typically occurs in West Texas from late spring to midsummer is when we see this happen. I wish I could put a calendar date on this, but it varies so much in the state that it's really hard to be specific. And even then, it's going to vary from tree to tree. So the best advice I can give you is to thoroughly inspect your trees before you are spraying, and that way you're not wasting that herbicide or that product. So let's look at those rates for a mesquite leaf spray herbicide application using the Brush Busters IPT approach. We recommend using Sendero. By far, that has been the most consistent and the most effective herbicide that we have found from a foliar application. So the old application of Remedy Reclaim is insignificant compared to what Sendero can do from a plant mortality perspective. So if you're still using the old Remedy Reclaim, go ahead and switch to Sendero because your plant mortality is going to increase indefinitely. With the foliar spray application, you will need a surfactant, absolute must-have. Preferably, we like to use a non-ionic surfactant. That's what NIS stands for. In your surfactant, you want to use something with a high active ingredient, just to make sure it's a quality, high quality surfactant, and also to make sure too that's not going to be mixing or having any adverse reactions to the herbicide that you're using. Okay, that's going to be at a 0.25% rate. And then you also want to use some type of dye as a spray indicator, and we recommend at a 0.25% rate as well. If you're using Sendero, you can use water as your carrier, and so you will bring it up to volume. If you're spraying 1 gallon, 5 gallons, it doesn't matter. You bring that up to volume with water. So there will be no diesel, no basal oil, nothing in this herbicide mix if you are using Sendero and if you are spraying it as a foliar application. You want to wet all the foliage to a glisten. So you want to be able to see that there's herbicide on there, but you don't want it dripping off. You don't want to be wasteful of that product. Some research has suggested that soil temperature should reach 75 degrees Fahrenheit at a 12-inch depth. And again, a lot of variation in this exists, depending on the type of growing season that you're having. So sometimes we can see those temperatures all the way to September in certain parts of the state. If that is the case, you want to make sure that you still are dealing with a tree that has mature plant growth, that has not initiated any new growth, is at a consistent phenology stage, and has an adequate amount of leaf tissue available. So no frost damage, no hail damage, no insect damage, nothing like that. And you want to use ideally an X6 or an X8 nozzle to deliver that foliar spray, herbicide spray in a cone spray pattern. Now, the thing about this IPT is that it's very effective because you are usually getting really good coverage on that plant because it's not a broadcast application. But the problem with this is as your density in plants increases, so in trees per acre, the cost increases. And that's usually because of labor associated with it. So this is a graph showing the positive relationship between cost per acre and the increase in tree density or trees per acre. And this is just assuming that labor is at $12 an hour. So you can see that cost goes incredibly up if you're dealing from anywhere from 400 trees per acre or greater. And so our recommended threshold or cutoff rate for tree density from an IPT perspective is 400. If you think you have more than 400 trees per acre, then most likely individual plant treatment, IPT, or this brush busters approach is not going to be very cost effective. It will be very effective in terms of plant mortality. So if you've got grandkids running around, if you've got good summer help, college kids are coming home, whatever, put them to work, absolutely. But if it's you spraying it, you probably want to maybe rethink the whole approach when you're dealing with high amounts of tree densities. Again, 400 is our recommended cutoff. And a good rule of thumb to estimate that brush density, you can do this in multiple areas of your pasture. And this will help you determine the overall cost of a broadcast treatment as well if you transition from IPT to broadcast. And so what we recommend is to count every tree in a defined area of space. Now the numbers really work out if you use 66 by 66. So if you've got a field tape measure, something that can go out to, at least 66 feet, square that off and then count every tree in there. And then you're going to multiply that number by 10. And then that math, if done correctly, will give you the number of trees per acre. It will allow you to scale up on a per acre basis. And then you can start to see, is it worthwhile to pursue IPT, or is this something I need to think about bringing in an airplane or a helicopter aerial application on. Determining your overall brush density, this is just a side note, but this will really help you get a feel for your stalking rate and get a feel for your grazable acres as well. If you know for sure what type of brush density you're dealing with in your pastures on your place. Okay, so the mesquite control summary, broadcast treatment becomes more economical at that 400 cutoff rate. Trees greater than 6 feet tall it's very difficult to get good coverage. Now I'm 5'5", and so I go with the 5 foot cutoff. My husband, he's 6'5", and so he's going to be a little bit more successful in handling taller trees. Again, my recommendation to you is don't start spraying something that you can't you can't finish. So if you start on the bottom branches and as you get to the top, it looks a lot bigger than what you thought it was. Right there, you've just created a problematic situation 2 or 3 years down the road, because things are going to resprout and you did not cover or have adequate coverage for that entire plant. So make sure you know what you're getting into before you commit to spraying. Trees with multiple stems are best with the foliar application. Some research has suggested that anything more than 4 stems, it's more efficient and cost effective to switch to a foliar application rather than that stem spray application. But again, my husband, he swears by the stem spray approach because that is more effective, or he has seen higher success with that than that foliar application. So to each his own, but it is something to think about when you start thinking about the labor involved with these IPT approaches. And areas near sensitive crops, so if you've got any cotton near you or anything like that, it may be better to rely on a basal treatment or a stem spray treatment during the dormant season than pushing a foliar application during a growing season. That way you know for sure that you are doing your due diligence in terms of drift minimization. Okay, so we'll end it there for today. We'll get started on prickly pear tomorrow and also red berry juniper. We've got a little bit of time for questions. If anyone has any questions, we can do it via audio, or Jessica can probably see a chat box and read them out loud. But that's all we've got for today. And I appreciate your time and you logging in, and thank you for supporting these programs during our new normal.
Well, thank you. And thank you all for attending the second session of the Terrell County Virtual Lunch and Learn series. Just a reminder about filling out the evaluation. Again, it can be found on the same page as the Zoom link for this session under events on the Terrell County AgriLife page. This evaluation will be for both parts together brush busters today and tomorrow. And be sure to tune in tomorrow at the same time for part 2. Thank you, Dr. Treadwell. I've learned a lot. That was interesting to me.
Well, cool. Yeah, I hope everybody else can say the same. And I can't wait for tomorrow. Thank you, Jessica.
Great. Thank you.